Suicide is the leading cause of death among Japanese youth aged 15 to 39. When you hear this, what do you think? Japanese youth have no hope. Society has collapsed. That is how the media frames it. And many believe it. But this interpretation contains a critical epidemiological fallacy. Country A and Country B both have a suicide rate of 10 per 100,000. Identical. Yet proportional mortality is 20% in one and 66.7% in the other. They look completely different. Japan is exactly in Country B's position. This is the proportional mortality trap. In countries where other causes of death are low, suicide share rises mechanically. Japan has excellent healthcare, minimal traffic fatalities, and low infectious disease mortality. That is precisely why suicide ranks first. This is not a sign of societal despair. It is a structural consequence of public health success. The CDC's Epidemiology textbook warns explicitly, proportional mortality is not a rate, and should not be used to compare populations with different overall mortality levels. Let us look at the actual numbers. Among those under 30, suicide mortality is roughly 19.5 per 100,000 in Korea, 17 in New Zealand. Japan stands at 13.4, not exceptionally high. But Japan's preventable mortality rate is 86 per 100,000, far below the OECD average of 145. In other words, young Japanese face exceptionally low risk of death from other causes. As a result, only suicide's ranking is inflated. GBD 2019 data reveals a starkly different picture. Among those aged 10 to 24 globally, transport injuries and violence account for 32.7%, infectious and maternal causes 32.1%. Self-harm is just 8.2%. Yet in countries like Japan where other causes are extremely low, that 8.2% becomes the number one cause. This is the proportional mortality trap in action. When we look at absolute numbers, the picture changes entirely. India has 18% of the world's population but accounts for 28% of global suicide deaths. For women, that figure rises to 37%. Ready access to pesticides in rural areas serves as a highly lethal means. The intervention with the strongest evidence base in suicide prevention is means restriction. Between 2008 and 2011, Sri Lanka progressively banned imports of highly hazardous pesticides. Pesticide suicide mortality dropped 50%. Overall suicide mortality fell 21%. And method substitution was minimal. Why does this work? Studies of attempt survivors found that a substantial proportion experienced less than 10 minutes between suicidal ideation and the act itself. When lethal means are unavailable, a temporal buffer is created and the impulse subsides. Road traffic deaths kill approximately 1.19 million people per year globally. The WHO estimates that stricter speed limits could prevent 347,000 deaths, and mandatory seatbelts another 121,000. These are structural approaches through legislation and environmental design, not individual behavior change. When comparing cause of death statistics internationally, distinguishing proportional mortality from absolute mortality rate is an indispensable prerequisite. The suicide risk facing Japanese youth is a serious public health challenge, but interpreting suicide as the leading cause as evidence of societal despair is not epidemiologically supported. These deaths should be treated not as consequences of individual weakness, but as preventable public health events.